Now we're going to meet a man with a dream, one he took 40 years to achieve. This is the theme, this is the moment. Mick Colliss's time of glory, his time to shine. After years of dreaming of representing his country, he did it. Was it rugby? No. Was it cycling? Not even. Was it rugby? I already said no. It is Sudoku. Mick Colliss, the athlete he is, has woken up early to speak to us from Perth, and he joins me now to talk about how he made that lifelong dream of representing his country a reality. Mick, how are you? You good in the mornings?
Ellen, I'm all pumped up and fired up after that introduction. That was terrific.
I want to start you at the beginning because I think, like most Australian men and many Australian women, you dreamt of representing your country, but you always thought it would be on the rugby field. Why was that your romantic sport?
Oh, yeah, I mean, look, you're right. Just as kids growing up, we've got this whole romantic thing about playing for Australia, which I think is fantastic. And you go out and you play cricket in the backyard, and, you know, I always wanted to be Dougie Walters, or if I was playing rugby league, I wanted to be Terry Randall. I had all these idols as kids, and I just thought there would be nothing better than playing sport for your country. And I remember I was out at the SCG one day, and was on the days when you're allowed to actually go onto the SCG without being fined $5,000 at the end of a game. And I remember patting Dougie Walters on the back after he'd finished a day's play. And like, even now, that's just the most. And that was a long time ago, and that's still such a vivid memory for me now. And I just always thought there would be nothing like playing in front of 40,000 adoring fans just out there playing sport for Australia. And it was just something that stuck with me. I grew up playing rugby league. I grew up in Eastwood, and my old man was a leaguey, and my grandfather played rugby league for Balmain and West. So I grew up playing rugby league, then switched to rugby union at 15, and I did okay at that. And that's sort of what made me think, I think I'm destined to become a Wallaby. But it didn't really. I quickly found out that desire was no substitute for ability, unfortunately.
Were you any good at it?
Look, I was okay. As a junior player, I was quite tall. So in those days, there was no lifting in lineouts. So you had to be tall. And I was tall with a decent jump on me. So I actually made some junior representative teams. I played in the Sydney under-16s team, which was quite a good side to make. And I was on standby for the Australian under-17 team. And so I played some junior stuff, which kind of it gave me false hope. And so I honestly thought that it was just a matter of time. And I had a very good training ethic. I worked really, really hard, but there's a big difference between being an okay player and being a great player, and that distance with me was a long way apart. But as I said, I had some false hope as a junior, and I played at Eastwood, and I was named the Colt of the Year, or the most outstanding Colt at Eastwood. And the guy that was the runner-up was a guy called Richard Harry. And Richard went on to play, I think, 47 Test matches for Australia, and I didn't.
There you go. But you beat him once, mate.
I beat him once, and I never let him forget it.
Can you remember the moment when you realised it wasn't going to happen? You weren't going to represent Australia. You weren't going to be a Wallaby.
I think it would have been in about 1989, because I'd moved across. I'd played Colts and did very well, had a year of grade at Eastwood. Then I came across to Perth to study. And then I played first grade over in Perth, and then I went back to Eastwood, back to Sydney to play at Eastwood. And I think I was playing fourth grade. And it was at that moment that I thought, wow, I'm playing fourth grade at a club side, and then there's still third grade, second grade, first grade. That's just at Eastwood.
Yes.
Then there's all the other clubs in Sydney and all the other guys playing in the grades above me in my position. And I just thought, and that's just to play first grade. And then you've got everyone else in Queensland. Then you've got to make New South Wales, then Queensland, or whatever it might be, then the Wallabies. And I really think it was that year coming back and playing fourth grade was, and I also remember there was a training night, and we're up at TG Milner Field in Sydney, and I remember we were packing scrums, and I think I got put up to third grade for a training session, and I was playing. I normally played in the second row, and they put me back at number 8 at the back, and I packed in between these two behemoth human beings at second row, and it was so tight, and it was hurting my head. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really hurting my head, and I'm third grade. So I just kind of thought then that wow, I don't think I'm built or cut out for this.
Oh, what a dreadful realisation.
That was really horrible. Like that's coming back to me now, and I'm a bit disappointed that you've dug that deep memory out. But I just remember thinking, this is really hurting my head, and I'm sure that's not the attitude you have to take if you're going out there to play against the All Blacks.
That's right. Said no Wallaby ever. This is really hurting my head. Centre forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so what age are you then?
That was, that would have been, so that was about 89. So that was 23. So, 23, 24, coming into my prime.
All right. Now I'm going to take you to another moment, a better moment. You're on a plane and life takes a very unexpected turn when you see somebody scribbling away at some little puzzle. What was that?
Yeah, so I was with her. So once I decided that I'd never get to play for Australia, I thought that I'd spend my time watching Australia play because I loved being part of events and I loved being at the ground. I remember it was at 1989, I went out and watched the Lions play the Wallabies at the City Football Stadium, and they put the words to the anthem up on the big screen. And normally when they played the Test match, the anthem, everyone's just kind of murmurs it away, but they put the words up on the big screen and everybody sang it. There was 40,000 people singing this anthem, and that was just this moment where it was just, I thought, man, this is fantastic. So if I couldn't be out there on the paddock, I thought I want to be in sports crowds, and I still to this day love belting out the top of my lungs the Australian anthem before a Wallaby Test match.
Do you know the second verse?
I know it enough to kind of mumble through
Righto,
it. So,
okay.
So I'm pretty confident.
So you're pretty
with it.
serious about this?
I'm pretty serious about it, absolutely. Yeah. So we're on the way up to Brisbane to watch the Bledisloe Cup, and I'm with a mate, Mark Skiffington, or Skiffo as we call him, who I'd played rugby with in Perth and lived in Perth for about 7 years. So we're very good mates. Heading up to Brisbane, and the TV screen in the back of his seat wasn't working. So he's had to dig into his little travel-on bag, and he's pulled out a book of Sudoku puzzles. And I'd never, ever seen Sudoku before. And he started sort of just concentrating, doing this thing. And I said to him, look, what's that? And he said, it's Sudoku. And I said, what's Sudoku? And he explained the rules to me. And we'd had just the right number of beers, and we had our Wallaby scarf around my neck. And I just sort of thought to myself, I said to him, if we create our own World Sudoku Championships, we could actually pick ourselves in the Australian team and play for Australia. And that was one of those breakthrough moments where I thought all of a sudden, like this dream that had lied dormant in the back of my head for 20 odd years, all of a sudden there was this realisation that I could play for Australia again. And that was a very, very exciting moment, and because I thought this might actually be able to happen. But then when we got back home, I Googled World Sudoku Championships, and I discovered there had actually been one. Who'd have thought there actually was such a thing? And they had 114 competitors from 30 different nations at this World Championship. So it was bigger than the one that I would have ever held at my rugby club where we were going to hold ours. But then I thought, well, look, I've come too far, worked too hard to let it go. So that's when I started to turn my attention to finding out how you get to actually compete for your country at this World Sudoku Championships, because I thought, look, I've expired all my other options. This is my last throw of the dice. This is it. If this is the last one. And it turned out, to cut a long story short, to be selected to play for your country at the World Championships, you needed to be selected and have that selection ratified by your country's member of this thing called the World Puzzle Federation, which is like the ICC is to cricket or FIFA is to soccer.
So you're really researching this. You're going right into it.
Absolutely, because for some reason I thought this was it. This was my last chance. So I was going to give it, as I said, I had a good training ethic, and I was going to give this thing absolutely everything to see how far I could take this particular achievement of this particular new dream, which I'd only just discovered a couple of days ago. So I worked out, so you've got to be selected by your country's member of this World Puzzle Federation. And as it turned out, Australia didn't have a member of this World Puzzle Federation. So I've applied to become the Australian member, and I was accepted to become the member. So I am all of a sudden the Andrew Dimitri of Australian Sudoku, and it's my job to actually pick the Australian team, or I'm meant to organise the state and national championships and then pick an Australian team and send that Australian team to the next World Championship. So all of a sudden I had the power, and I was an Australian selector.
You were the person. You were everything.
I was it. I was the selector. So I picked myself and three mates, and we headed off to India as the first ever Australian Sudoku team.
Now, that is the most wonderful story. A couple of clarifying questions. Did you know how to play Sudoku?
No. At that point in time, I had never played a game of Sudoku. But for all my goal in life was to play for Australia, and here I was. I'd been picked in an Australian team. So that, for me, that was the dream. So there was a realisation a few months later that I didn't actually know what I was doing. But yeah, so at the time only Skiffo, who was the only one out of the four of us who'd actually played Sudoku before.
So you picked Skiffo?
Yeah, captain. Named him captain. Captain of Australia. Mark Skiffington, captain of Australia.
I bet he was pleased with that.
He was as proud as punch. Because again, he was like me. We played a lot of rugby together, trained very hard. He would have loved to have made the Wallabies, but didn't. But all of a sudden, here he is, like John Eales, Steve Waugh. He is captain of Australia.
Take me to the moment, because even though you were the Australian member of the World Federation puzzle, you were as well the national selector who was able to choose the 4 members of the team. There were still some anxious moments on the day that you announced the team. Were you worried that you wouldn't pick you?
Well, I was. And it's weird. Like, I remember that I talked about that Sydney under-16s team. I remember you played the tournament you did, then they played a possibles, probables game. This was the last game of the day. Then the next day you had to wake up and you had to look in the paper in the sports section up the back in the results to see if you'd made the team. So, and I remember my wife was in the Australian women's water polo team for about 9 years. And I remember there was an Australian Championships in Perth. And at the end of the tournament, they named the Australian team, and her surname was Wheelock. So she had to wait until she was one of the very last names called. And, I'm trying to count the names and numbers. Is she still going to make this team? And I just remember the drama of the teams being called out and just thinking, God, is she in it or is she out? And then hearing a name called and just the jubilation from me as her partner to hear her named. And I can't imagine what it must be like for her or anyone to be hearing their name called out. And that was something that I wanted to experience, that drama and that emotion of is my name going to be called? So we did organise an Australian Sudoku Championships because we wanted to make our selection official. So we organised an Australian Championships. Only 4 of us did turn up, so we knew we were a fair chance of making the 4-man team. And we've had a couple of few rounds of beers and a few bowls of chips, and then the time has come to announce the team. And I'm getting very, very nervous, thinking, this is the moment that I've waited 42 years for. And I've stood up. I remember standing up in the pub where we held our Australian Championships, and I've opened up the bit of paper and I've gone, the team to represent Australia at the World Sudoku Championships in Goa, India is, and I'm just thinking, please pick me, please pick me. And I've called out Mark Skiffington, Hamish Sutherland, Sandy Sutherland. I'm thinking there's one spot left. I've got everything crossed, and then I've heard my name, Mick Colliss. And I've just thought, wow. Double fist pump, I'm in the Australian team. And I still get goosebumps when I'm telling you this story now. It was just this surreal moment that I'd been named because as a kid growing up, I didn't dream about owning my own home or having a job. My dream was to play for Australia, and here I was. I'd just been picked in my first ever Australian team, and it was it was a wonderful moment. It really was.
Oh, the double fist pump in the pub.
The double fist pump, and I'm not even a fist pumper, and I got the double fist pump.
So you've got it all. You've been named in the team. Admittedly, you're the 4th man, but it's a 4-man team.
4-man team, yeah, and it doesn't matter.
Okay.
You're in the team.
A bit of humility is a very Australian characteristic.
Yeah, that's right. That's
sporting
right.
Greats. So, notwithstanding the fact that you don't know Sudoku, but surely that can't be that hard. You then need uniforms. If you're going to represent your country, you need to be kitted out. Did you get yourself some green and gold? You were in charge.
Absolutely. I was in charge. And again, that's like you see the cricketers when they come back from their tours and they walk through the airport and they've got about 1,000 of those massive big bags and they've got all their uniforms, and the Wallabies when they go away. So again, I lived with a guy called Marty Roebuck who, we trained just as hard. We trained every day together for about 3 years. He was playing for the Wallabies. I was playing 4th grade. And I remember when he went away on his first Wallaby trip, and just all the gear that he got. Even the Sydney under-16s team, like we had blazers and ties, and one of the most exciting things about making a rep team is the gear that you get. And that's what everyone wants.
It's all about the
kit. Know the kit. What gear did you get? And as a 16-year-old kid, I lived in that gear that I got from that tour for, I reckon, a good 4 or 5 years. I had tracksuits and running shoes, and it was fantastic. So we thought, we're in the Australian team, and the next obvious step is you've got to get yourself a decent kit. So we had a whole lot of uniforms. So we had the number 1s, which was the blazer, the tie, the white shirt, grey pants, shoes, and that was for travel days and any official functions that we would go to in India. We had the number 2s, was the polo shirt and the walk short. The number 3s was the t-shirt, the gym shorts. The number 4s was the singlet and the board shorts. And the number 5s was the green and gold Australian playing kit. We had a pair of green and gold Australian thongs, 2 Australian caps with a bottle opener in the peak, and a stubby holder. So we knew every day on tour, we knew you wear your number 1s or your number 2s, or this afternoon, boys, you're into the number 3s. We're heading down to the beach, jumping into the number 4s. So the whole tour was completely planned. So we knew we had our gear for every hour, every day. We knew exactly what gear that we would wear, because we were there playing for Australia. We were proud of that, and we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we were the Australian team.
Well done. Mick Colliss is my guest. He represented Australia in the sport. Is it a sport? The puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely sport.
It is a
without
sport
doubt.
of...
It's the world game. The world game.
Indeed, the world game of Sudoku. I just have this image of you meeting the others, Skiffo and the others, at the airport in your travel day uniform. What an enormously proud day that must have been.
It was.
You got
It
on the
was.
plane, and I think it was on that flight, wasn't it, that you finally had the realisation about the significance of the fact that you didn't really understand Sudoku. Everything else, you'd planned the pants off everything else except how to actually play this little numbers game.
Yeah, so as my wife says, all the gear, no idea. And she was dead right. I remember we were about an hour out of Singapore on the way to the World Championships in our number one, sitting on the plane, and then I've suddenly broken into a cold sweat, and Skiffo's notices to me, mate, what's wrong? And I remember I said to him, mate, I'm on my way to India to represent Australia at the World Sudoku Championships. And he's looked at me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, mate, I know, and you should be very proud. And I said, I am, but I don't know how to play Sudoku. And that was this realisation that as I said, my goal was to make the Australian team, and I'd done that. And that was, but it's dawned on me that, God, I've got to actually know what I'm doing. So he sat down and we've pulled out the two in-flight magazines, and he said, look, the best thing to do here, it's going to be a pressure situation. Let's go one-on-one. So it was me versus the skipper on the plane with the in-flight magazine Sudoku puzzles. Started that one. I had no idea. I'd stuffed that up. I had no idea how to do it. And there's two in the puzzle booklet in the in-flight magazine. I stuffed that one up. He's had to pull out his little trusty book that he pulled out that day back on the plane, 6 months ago on the way to Brisbane. And he's talked me through how to do it. And I finally did one puzzle on that plane just as we were taxiing into Singapore Airport on the way. That's when I completed my first puzzle. And that was the relief for me, because I knew that gave me a massive confidence boost, because I just set a PB. I knew I was in career best form, and I knew I was taking my A game to India. So I knew I could actually play the game. I knew what I was doing, and that was it. The taper began, and I then rested off as we headed in to go to the World Championships.
Okay, I'm still here. All right. Now, dare I ask how you did in India just quickly, or that would just ruin the story?
Well, Ellen, I remember that we sat down because the puzzle competition itself was 2 days. There was the team event and the individual component. And the individual component, there was 45 minutes, and each round, and there were 7 rounds of 45 minutes, and each round consisted of 12 puzzles. And unbeknownst to me, I only thought that the puzzles that would be at the World Championships were the ones that you see in the paper. But when I turned over my puzzle booklet and turned to the first page, and I've seen this thing that I had never seen before. I had no concept of how to even begin starting this particular Sudoku puzzle. So I'm starting to panic. And then so I've had to go to the second page. I didn't know how to do that one. Turn to the third page, and I finally found one which in international terminology is called the classic Sudoku puzzle. So I've thought, okay, I recognise that. I know how to do that. So I've knuckled down and I got stuck into that puzzle. Now, we had 45 minutes in each round to try and complete 12 puzzles. I finished my first puzzle in 41 minutes, but I knew that I'd finished a puzzle for Australia and I'd scored 5 points for Australia. I played rugby over here with a guy called John Wellborn, who went on to play for the Wallabies. He played 6 games for Australia and didn't score any points. Here I was, game 1, and already 5 points on the board for my country. So that was, again, another highlight. But for the entire competition, out of the 89 individuals, I finished 89th.
And look, we are out of time, Mick, but is that your philosophy? If you're going to fail gloriously, keep the dream alive?
Look, I think so. And I think there's a wonderful... it's like a speech or a quote by a guy, I think it was Theodore Roosevelt, which starts off about it's not the critic who counts, it's it's the man in the middle that deserves the accolades, and that finishes something about failing while failing greatly, and it's. I think that's too many people don't do things because they think they might fail, but I think you mentioned in one of the top of the promo that. It's an obstacle. Failure, it's not a permanent thing. And if we went through life being scared to fail, we wouldn't try anything. And I was terrible at Sudoku, but that was one of the great moments in my life. Even in the lead up to that, when I couldn't, another one of the sports I tried, I wanted to be a surf Ironman like Grant Kenny and, be in the Australian surf lifesaving team. There's nothing more Australian, or paddle kayak at the Olympics. And I was a terrible Ironman, but I just loved competing as an Ironman, and getting off the ski and then going to the run gave me just such a thrill to do that. Even though I was so far off the back of the race, the fact that I was actually out there competing and doing that was a great, and that gave me just so much just enjoyment and, as strange as it is, some self-esteem that I was actually out there competing, doing this thing that I love doing. And I say that to my kids, you know, if you want to have a go at something, just have a go, because you've got nothing to lose. You might be good at it, you might not be good at it, but the experience that you get out of actually doing something, that's the valuable thing for me. And for me, you know, if I was scared about not being able to play Sudoku, I would never have got to wear the green and gold. I would never have travelled to India with my mates playing for Australia on tour. You know, that's been one of the highlights of my life, and failure, or the fear of failure, would have stopped me doing that. And you know, as I said, we might have on paper we might have failed, but we came back. It was the most successful ever tour by an Australian team to World Sudoku Championships. We returned as Australia's most capped Sudoku players, and we've got 4 Australian players internationally in the top 100. So it was a hugely successful trip.
I've loved talking to you, Mick. You really have raised my spirits. I'm going to pull my jogging shoes on. I'm going to sign up for a February fun run, and I don't care if I come dead last. You're great. Thanks so much for telling us your story.
Ellen, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Mick Colliss there, Australian Sudoku champion.